First time was 1995, right? 1995. And then maybe 10 years ago, it's 2010 or something, yeah. And then now. So that's kind of neat to be able to come back to the same church again and see some familiar faces, and especially those of you who have been to Thailand, it's nice to see you guys again. So it's just a privilege to be able to be here and to be able to share with you more about what is going on in Thailand and around the world. The theme for the Christian Missionary Alliance, I didn't see it here, but you'll see there's some posters outside. The theme this year for the Christian Missionary Alliance of Missions is Awaken. I see it up there, okay, up on the screen back there. Awaken. And the word awaken is a verb, which means to cause to stop sleeping or to rouse from sleep. And I want to ask you, how many of you guys were awakened this morning by an alarm clock? Okay, some of you were. How many of you are awakened by an alarm clock on Monday morning? Okay, more of you are awakened that way. For me, I am often awakened by alarm clock, but I personally prefer to awaken naturally, and I feel more refreshed and ready to go. And one thing that's kind of neat for me is on these mission tours when I visit churches, I don't have to get up so early in the morning. It's nice to be able to just be awakened naturally. But for those of you who are awakened by alarm clocks, you have many choices to make. Whether you're going to hit that alarm clock or the snooze button and then turn over and go to sleep again, or you're going to hit the thing off and make sure it stops ringing and turn over and go to sleep again, or whether you're going to turn it off and actually get up and get ready for your day. But there are some awakening alarms in our lives that are actually pleasant. And for me, an awakening alarm that is pleasant is when the alarm goes off saying that the cookies are ready to come out of the oven. I like those. And another one is the buzz I get. I have a Fitbit, you know, the buzz you get that says you've done 10,000 steps for the day. Those are really encouraging things for me. Awaken can also mean something emotional or intellectual. It could be you're awakened by new news or issues or events, something that you may have known about before but are reawakened again, or something new in your life and you're awakening up to that. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Detroit, and I found out there's another word for awaken that I still am not really comfortable using yet, but they'll say that this person is woke. Does anybody know that one? Okay, this person is woke, which I understand to means you're up to date in things and, you know, whatever. But if you have never heard that, ask a young person and they'll be able to explain that to you a little bit better. I still need to figure out that word as well. Our Alliance founder, Dr. A.B. Simpson, once famously told newspaper reporters who were constantly hounding him all the time that if they came to his church, he would share with them when Jesus Christ would return again. So the newspaper reporters were excited about this news, and they wanted to find out what he was going to say. So they showed up on Sunday morning, and Dr. A.B. Simpson read to them from Matthew 24:14, which says, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end shall come." And he explained to them that this is the only concrete detail that Jesus gave in regards to his coming back again. That is that the gospel access needs to be available to all peoples around the world, and then the end will come. It's probably not what the newspaper reporters wanted to hear, but this is a story we tell in our Alliance family because it resonates with the motivation which gave rise to our mission. And that is, as we join God in his plan to make gospel access available to all peoples around the world, we have a part in Jesus' imminent return as our coming King. This idea is rooted in this particular verse, Matthew 24:14, and it's what awakened the disciples of Jesus from being a band of reluctant leaders to becoming a force that changed their world or impacted their known world with the gospel. Today I'm going to be speaking from Matthew 24 and 25, and those two chapters talk about the awakening that Jesus gave to his disciples regarding the future, to this kingdom reality. And you can turn to those. I'll be referring back and forth to Matthew 24 and 25, but because those are long chapters, we're not going to read them all here this morning. I want to give you just a brief overview of what they say, and then I'll refer back and forth to them throughout the morning. Matthew 24 begins with Jesus storming out of the temple in Jerusalem for what would be his last time before his death and resurrection. And it was during this time that the disciples, unbelievably, didn't really catch what Jesus was doing or what Jesus was feeling at the time. Jesus was upset because the temple leaders could not understand what he was sharing about the end times or about the gospel of Jesus Christ. The disciples, however, at that time were more interested in just looking around at all the buildings and marveling at the beautiful architecture and stuff. And so Jesus awakens them by telling them, soon these buildings will be destroyed. And this got the disciples thinking, like, oh, when is that going to happen? What are the signs of your return? What do we need to expect of the coming of the end of the age? Well, to make a long story short, the disciples assumed that the destruction of these temples would relate to his return as coming king. And this would bring the end of the age that they were presently living in and the beginning of an eternal age in which Jesus would be the ruler. But Jesus teaches them in Matthew 24 and 25 that the end wasn't going to come that quickly as they were thinking. The disciples at that point had no idea that Jesus was going to complete the salvation of mankind by dying on the cross and rising again. And then would start a new age, which is between the first and second comings of Jesus, which is the age that disciples would be living in at that point. This is something new that the disciples hadn't thought about before, and it awakened them to a new idea of what their life was going to be like. And it's important for us to know about that because we are presently living in that age, the age between the first and second comings of Jesus Christ. There's a prayer in the Bible that we often refer to as the Lord's Prayer. And in the prayer says, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." And this is kind of a label that we can label this particular age that we're living in, the kingdom come age. The age in between Jesus' first coming and his next coming as our coming king, the kingdom come age. In Matthews 24 and 25, Jesus spent some time, and just as we read this morning, sharing with the disciples about the violence, the wars, rumors of wars, false messiahs, all these persecutions that were going to come. And at the same time, he shared with the disciples that this is an age in which his gospel is going to be preached throughout the world to all nations, and then the end will come. So the verse that A.B. Simpson read to the reporters is quite important for us to know what is going to happen in this particular age, or what is our part in this age of kingdom come. First of all, we're living in an age where the kingdom is present and growing in the midst of a world that is in the midst of violence and turmoil. And Jesus is using this time to bring more people into his kingdom, and then the end will come. What's exciting to me is that Jesus has invited us to join him in that as well. He has entrusted us with the good news of the gospel to share with the entire world as a testimony to all peoples. And so we have a part in bringing about the end of the age when Jesus will come back again as our coming king. So I don't know how that sounds to you, but for me, that's kind of an alarm or a wake-up call. It's a buzz that comes to me and reminds me, oh, well, what is my part in all of this as well? The disciples, it was a big wake-up call for them because they were very confused about the kingdom, thinking that the eternal kingdom would come soon and solve all of their difficulties. And I think many of us would like to see that as well. It's not easy to live our Christian life in the world that we are presently living in. And it would be nice just to have Jesus come back again and it's all done with and we're able to be with him. But there may be some of us here that are so caught up in our everyday activities, our work, and the pressures all around us that we might actually neglect or forget what is our part in this present kingdom come age. What should we be doing during this time? And so I'm hoping that from Matthew 24:14, we will again awaken to what Jesus is doing during this time period and what our part should be in that as well. I'll be referring back to Matthew 24 and 25 because in those two chapters there are three, this is a hard word to say, parallel parables. Say that 3 times fast. There are 3 parallel parables that will help us to see what Jesus wants us to do in this present kingdom come age. And the first one is, always be ready, living in love with the coming King. And that's Jesus. That's him. He's coming. He's going to come someday. In these chapters, Jesus describes the turmoil of the world around us, and he also shares that the preaching of the gospel will be preached throughout the entire world, and then the end will come. But the very first thing that Jesus wants us to do, our part in this present kingdom come age, is to live in love with him. Live in love with what he has done for us. For us who are Christians, it's a special miracle that we have that privilege to be a part of him. Living in love with Jesus doesn't mean doing. It doesn't mean getting things done for Jesus or following certain rules or regulations or trying to prove yourself to Jesus. But it's actually reminding ourselves of who we are in God and being able to turn to Jesus and say, thank you for what you have done for me. I love you. I appreciate what you have done for me. In this kingdom come age, Jesus wants to awaken us to the possibility of our love for him growing cold. Live in love with Jesus. Live in an intimate, loving relationship with our coming King. And as we do so, we will grow in our relationship. We will grow in areas that we have never thought of before. It's more than just attending church on Sunday, but it's about opening your hearts and your lives to Jesus, allowing him to come in. And as he is working and living in our lives, his influence will help us to realize the wisdom, the peace, and joy that can only come from him, not from any other thing around us. Also, our relationship with Jesus, a close relationship with Jesus, will open our eyes to see what he wants us to be doing in this present kingdom come age. In verse 14 it says, this is going to happen in the whole world as a testimony to all nations or all peoples. If you look out your windows today, you'll see that that has not yet happened. There are many people groups around the world who have yet to hear about Jesus coming again, have yet to hear about the good news of salvation. And one of those places around the world happens to be Thailand, where I'm living. In Thailand, just 0.5% of the population are Christians. And if you were to be able to picture that, if you have a group here in this room of 200 people, just one person would be a believer in that group of 200 people. Where I live in Thailand, and where Hong is also living, is in the northeast part of Thailand. It's the least reached group of people. In that area, just 0.1% of the population are believers. So if you have a group of 1,000 people, just one person would be a Christian if it were compared to Thailand. Where I live, I'm living right now on home assignment for 1 year, and I'm living in a little tiny town called Sayo, Oregon. Has anybody heard of Sayo, Oregon? Oregon, I think that's how you guys do it. Have you heard of it? That is amazing. Why do you know Sayo? Okay, perfect. Okay, I had never heard of Scio before. Has anybody heard of Salem, Oregon? Okay, Scio is 20 miles from Salem. And then the rest of you heard of Portland, Oregon. Scio is about 2 hours from Portland. Scio is a very small town of 900 people. So if you consider the statistics in Thailand, the entire town of Scio would have only one believer, if that is in the northeast part of the country. That's what it looks like in that country. The majority of us here in America have access to the gospel, whether that be through all the mini churches all around us, radio, TV, celebrating Christmas. We have access to the gospel. But we don't actually come to know and love God until somebody has shared that with us. And as we remind ourselves of how we came to know and love God and share that with other people, that helps us to grow in our relationship with God and helps us to grow as a believer. When I have short-term teams come to Thailand, just like the team that came in June, I want them to prepare their testimony to be able to share with the people there of how they came to know Jesus Christ. When I have my Thai friends come to America, I have them prepare their testimonies to share with people, to share how they came to know the Lord as well. Because it's in sharing our testimony or in hearing the testimony of others that we grow in our love for Jesus Christ, and we become motivated to continue to grow in that relationship. My friend Nok is a friend that I met in Bangkok in one of our churches, and before she was a Christian, she was a very closed person. She didn't want to be involved in anybody's life. She didn't want anybody to be involved in her life, and she was pretty much closed in. But a friend of hers shared the good news of salvation with her, and her life changed completely. She became an open person, wanting to share with other people how she became a Christian, wanting to share what she had to other people who were in need as well. One of her dreams was to find her long-lost brother. She had not seen him for 21 years. And one day that dream came true. She received a phone call from the hospital, and the hospital said that her brother was in very serious condition and not expected to live. So after 21 years, Nok went to meet her brother for the first time. And he had throat cancer, so he had a feeding tube down his nose. He had morphine patches all over his body, and he wasn't able to speak. We shared the gospel with him, and he wrote on a piece of paper 4 words that he remembered from being a child. When he was a young child, he lived with his aunt who was a believer, and she shared many stories from the Bible with him. The 4 words that he wrote were Bethlehem, Joseph, Judas, and Yahweh. I don't know why he remembered those words, but that's what he remembered. As we shared the gospel with him over and over again, he finally one day nodded his head to say that he wanted to accept Jesus Christ into his life. And when he did that, his life changed. He had a glow on his face. He had peace on his face, and even the nursing staff around him saw that as well. Shortly thereafter, he passed away. And when he passed away, Nok's first words to me were, I wish that I had met him sooner. I wished I could have been a sister to him longer. And I wished that I could have shared Jesus with him before this. And I told Nok, no, the Lord knew exactly when the right timing was. Because before this, he wasn't ready to make any thought of changes in his life. But it wasn't until he was in suffering and pain that his heart was softened, and he could accept Nok as his sister, and he could accept Jesus Christ as his Savior and Lord. When we realize what a miracle it is that we have access to the gospel or to the good news of the kingdom, we become motivated because we love what Jesus did for us. Don't you? I sure do. I just am so thankful that he took away the sins in my life and gives me freedom and joy every single day. Jesus says the first way to live in this kingdom come age is to live in love with him. Walk with him every day. How do we know this? Well, there are two parallel parables in Matthews 24 and 25 that help us to see this as well. In Matthew 24, verses 43 through 44, is the parable of the thief in the night. And this parable talks about if a house owner knew that a thief were coming in the middle of the night, that person would prepare themselves to face that thief. The way they would prepare is they would maybe take all of their valuables and put it in a place that the thief couldn't get to. They might stay awake and alert, wait for that thief to come or tell the police and make sure that the thief is taken care of. They would be alert and ready if they knew the thief were coming. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced that before. Many of you may have experienced having your house burglarized or things like that, but I have experienced this particular thing in my own life. One time I was living in a certain house, and I noticed some things out of my house were missing. And so I thought, I wonder what's going on, and I decided that I would sleep. My house, I had a two-story house, so I would sleep downstairs to wait and find out what is going on, how come these things are going away. Probably not the best move to make, but I slept the first night on the floor downstairs and nothing happened. And then the second night came and I was awakened by the thief. It was my next door neighbor, a 13-year-old boy, and he was stealing my Christmas tree decorations. So I woke up and I said, "What are you doing there?" And he's shocked right away, and I said, "You go back to your house right now." And so he went back and he went around a pole, and I said, "I see you back there. You go back inside your house and I'll come and see you tomorrow morning." And so he went back into the house, and then I started shaking because I realized, even though he's a 13-year-old boy, I caught him in the middle of an act, and I've never done that before, and it was scary to me, quite scary. I think in this parable, Jesus isn't trying to make us scared about being aware of thieves in the middle of the night, but I think he wants us to realize that just as a homeowner would be alert and ready, be watchful if they knew that a thief were coming, so we should also be alert and ready to be a part of what Jesus is doing in the world around us. And that alert and readiness stems from our gratitude that we had the opportunity to hear the gospel in the first place. And don't we want to share that miracle with other people around us as well? The second parable is in Matthew chapter 25, and it's the story of the 5 wise virgins and the 5 foolish virgins. And they're waiting for the bridegroom to come. And part of waiting for the bridegroom to come in those days was to have your lamps filled with oil. And so the 5 wise virgins got ready, they leaned into it, they were expectant, their lamps were full of oil. They had no idea when the bridegroom was going to come, but they were going to be ready whenever that time came. The 5 foolish virgins, I don't know what happened to them. I'm guessing that they got caught up in the everyday activities and just forgot to get their lamps full of oil. So when the bridegroom did show up, their lamps were not full of oil, and they were not ready to be a part of the party. It reminds me of the book of Revelation, where Jesus talks to the church in Ephesus, and he says, "You are a very busy church, you have a lot of activities, a lot of good things going on, but you have lost your motivation. You have lost your first love." To live in the age of kingdom come, between Jesus' first and second comings, the first thing he wants us to do is to live in love with him. The second thing he wants us to do is always be investing. Investing what he put into your hands into those things that will be eternal. If I were to say that in a different way, be investing in those temporal or temporary practical things that God has given you, and things that will last beyond his second coming, things that will last for eternity. Jesus wants to convert money, talents, opportunities into things that will last for eternity. He doesn't want these things to burn in the bonfire at the end of the age, but he wants them to bear fruit that will last forever. And we know this because of two parables in Matthew 24 and 25. In chapter 24, verse 45, Jesus talks about the good servant. And the good servant gives, the master gives the good servant all the resources he needs for when the master has gone away. And when the master goes away, the good servant uses those resources according to what the master wanted. And then Jesus talks about the bad servant. And the bad servant doesn't do these things. So the master gives the bad servant the same resources, tells him what to do with them. And when the master goes away, then the bad servant, instead of using those resources on the people or taking care of them, he wastes them on himself. He uses them on selfish desires and actually abuses the people that he's responsible for. If we're not careful, we can be that way as well. God has given us resources. We have education, we have time, we have finances, we have opportunities. But the question is, what are we doing with the things that God has given us? In the kingdom come age, Jesus wants people who are motivated by their love for him to turn around and say, I want to use what you have given me into those things that will last for eternity, into those things that will make a difference. I'm willing to invest in making sure that there are people from every tongue, tribe, and nation that have the opportunity to hear the good news of the gospel, to see it lived out, and whose lives are touched by people of the kingdom who are living in and around them. In chapter 25 of Matthew, starting at verse 14, there's another parallel story which talks about the bags of gold, or the parable of the talents. And this is a similar story as the first one in chapter 24, in that there's a master and there's some servants. So the master gives the first servant 5 bags of gold. And the second one he gives 2. And the third one he gives 1. And then the master goes away. And the first 2 servants take their bags of gold and they multiply them. They're able to double the value of those bags. But the third servant is afraid. And so he digs a hole in the ground and he puts his bag of gold there and waits for the master to come back. From these 2 parables, I think we can get 2 warnings that Jesus is giving in regards to our investments. The first thing is that we might use what he has given us on ourselves, on selfish things, rather than using them on things that last for eternity. And the second warning is that when Jesus gives us the investments, whether it might be talents or whatever they might be that he gives us, we might be afraid to use them, in the way that Jesus would want us to use them. In our Alliance family, the global Alliance family throughout the United States, people are very good about investing in things that last for eternity. There's churches like yours who are investing in your community and in the people around you. I love what I see, and I just learned about those plastic bags and how to make those. I forget what they're called, but they're mats, and you have whatever they're called. They're very, very interesting to me. But that's a way of investing in your community. And the Global Alliance is very good investing in the work around the world as well. The Christian and Missionary Alliance in America raised last year $61 million in order for 700 international workers to serve around the world in various places. And I just want to thank you for your part in that as well. People might think, oh, we're just a small church or we don't have much to give, but every single church has a part in that big an investment, and that has enabled people like myself to serve in Thailand and other places around the world as well. I just want to share with you a little bit about a church that you guys are familiar with, the Kun Han Church in Sisagate. And for those of you who are not familiar with Kun Han in Sisagate, it is located right on the Thai-Cambodian border of Thailand. And this church is very good in reaching out to people in its community. This church has planted 3 churches so far. One of their churches, they actually support a full-time pastor. Another church, it already has its own pastor and they support themselves. And then another church that they are in the process of planting is right across the border into Cambodia, just right along the border. And the way this started was a businessman from the church went over to Cambodia to conduct some business, and as he was coming back over the border, he heard some Christian music. And so he decided to follow that. And he found a young brother and sister, they were teenagers, with some little children around them, and found out that this brother and sister were orphans living on their own, and they were trying to take care of these little children who were also orphans as well, teaching them Christian songs or anything that they knew about Jesus Christ. They lived in a little thatch hut that didn't have any walls around it. So this businessman who came upon them gave them some rice and gave them some food, and then he brought their story to the Kunhan church. And the Kunhan church fell in love with what was going on in there, and they wanted to have a part in investing in this brother and sister. So they began to send rice and food over there. They helped rent a small home for this brother and sister to live in that had walls around it, and to help raise those few children that they were looking after as well. The pastor of the Kunhan church, Ajahn Somjai, who we talked with a couple nights ago, he was afraid to go to Cambodia at first because he was afraid that he might get caught by the police and be put into a Cambodian jail. And he didn't want to have any part with that. But finally, the Lord gave him courage to go into Cambodia, and he started to go on a regular basis teaching the Bible to this young brother and sister. The young brother and sister began to share what they learned from him with the people in their community, and a small group of believers rose up as a result of that. So the church started to get excited, and they started to send in short-term mission teams to teach hair cutting, or teach cooking, or to share from the Bible, or give testimony each time they came in. A businessman came into the area as well, and this is a different businessman, and he bought a piece of property for a future church to be built in that particular area. The reason I share this story for you is because the investments of this church were because of sacrifices that they made. They made sacrifices in money, in talents, in time, in supplies, but the results are eternal for many people in that small community. Always be investing what God has put into your hands into things that will last for eternity. Many of you are very good at that. You're already involved with many very good investments. But maybe there might be some people who have never heard of that before, never heard of the idea of investing in order for people in other parts of the world to be able to hear the gospel for the first time. And if you're among any of those that have never heard that before, or you're hearing this and maybe thinking about that, I just want to invite you to join in that effort as well. That's one of the reasons we have missions emphasis like this, to open or awaken your eyes to see what is going on, and to maybe see how you could invest to see how this could affect other people around the world too. You can talk to your pastor about that. I'm sure they know, they can give you ideas of what would be the best way to do that. The last thing that Jesus tells us to do is to always be serving, because the kingdom is love and people are precious. Lest we think that it's just about preaching the gospel, whether it's on TV or the internet, Jesus says, no, that's not all that I want you to do. I want you to be serving other people in my name. That's what the kingdom is about. The kingdom is about love, and people are precious. It's just as important as sharing the gospel. At the end of chapter 24, we talked about that evil servant who took the things that the master gave him and wasted them on himself. Well, there's another parallel parable in chapter 25, verse 31, which talks about a judgment day that is coming for all of us. And on this judgment day, Jesus separates the goats from the sheep. Okay, and he puts the sheep on his right-hand side and the goats on his left-hand side. And the sheep are those that have been serving. And so what Jesus says to the sheep on his right-hand side is, you fed me when I was hungry, you gave me water when I had none, and you clothed me when I was naked, and you visited me when I was in prison, and you served me when I was sick. And the sheep said to him, when did we ever see you sick or naked or hungry or in prison? And he says, when you've done these things to the least of these people, you've done it to me. Did you hear that? Serving those in need is what it means to serve Jesus. Jesus is not saying this in contrast to preaching the gospel. We need to preach the gospel to all people so that they have the opportunity to hear. But he's saying that preaching is not enough. We need to be serving as well. Why? Because his kingdom is love and people are precious. They're not just objects or target groups, but they're people who need to hear God's word and they need to receive from his hands. And we are the people to do that. I want to brag a little bit about the home church that I'm at right now. It's the Salem Alliance Church in Salem, Oregon. And this church has sent several short-term teams over to Thailand. One of their short-term teams is a medical team, and we often go up to the hill tribes people of Thailand, way up in the mountains, the Hmong hill tribe. And we have clinics, medical clinics up there. And Dr. Tom, the guy that's in the green suit there, Dr. Tom has been on almost all of our teams. And he began to notice quite quickly, what's that? Wonder if something else is coming. He began to discover quite quickly that the Hmong people have a lot of lung problems. And so he began to look around, and we figured out that Hmong people build fires inside their houses to cook and keep warm. Thailand is a hot country, but when you're up in the mountains, it's colder than where the rest of us are. And they need fires to keep themselves warm in the wintertime. But these open fires cause smoke in the entire house. It's completely smoked out. Not only that, their walls and their ceilings are just full of soot from years and years of having fires. So that's why these people have lung problems. So Dr. Tom decided to talk to people at his church and try to figure out a way that they could build fires and not have so much smoke. So a team of guys got together and started researching this, and they came up with a stove that you could build fires, keep you warm, and they would have very, very little smoke. There was a certain way that you build them. So they practiced them, they worked on them, they checked out the materials were available up in the hill tribes. And so one year they brought a team, we called it the stove team, to come out and show what it would be like to build these stoves. So we went to several churches and built stoves, and we worked on it together, explained the whole concept of it, and then the team went back to the States. And about 3 months later, I went up to those churches just to see how it's doing. You know, are they using the stoves? How is it working for them? And to my surprise, they weren't using them. So I said, well, what's going on? How come you aren't using them? Because this is for your health that we are trying to do this. And they said their problem was that the stoves didn't heat up fast enough. They wanted the fires to come right away, and they were not able to handle the big pots that they use in cooking. So I brought that information back to the church and told them, and so they did some more research and came up with another idea of a stove where the fire heats up faster and it can handle big pots as well. So just this last February, they came out again to try this stove in various villages, and it appears that the people are very open to this idea. I have not had a chance to go back up there to see how it's working, but I'm hoping that they're beginning to use them. The team went there to share their concern for the physical needs of the Hmong people, their lung problems. But they also came to share their concern for their spiritual needs as well. And they had opportunities to share their testimony. We had many opportunities to witness to the people in that area. And the reason for that is because God's kingdom is love and people are precious. Jesus said to the people that were on his left-hand side, the goats, "You didn't do these things for the least of these. You overlooked them, you walked past them, you didn't care about helping those that were hurting. You didn't care about the foreigner, you didn't care about the immigrant. And if you haven't done it for them, the person you are neglecting," this is Jesus speaking, "the person you are really neglecting is me. How can you say that you love me and not use what I've given you on people like that I have provided for you?" That's not the way to live in this kingdom come age. We are always to be serving because his kingdom is love and people are precious. So there are 3 great stories and 3 great words to help us to know how we should live in this kingdom come age. And Jesus is saying to us, wake up. Are we willing to live like this? Some of you may have heard this call before. Some of you may have never heard this call before. It might be your very first time. For those who have heard or have been woken up before about living in this kingdom come age, how we should live, you might be hearing this over and over and over again, and maybe today is another time that you're hearing it one more time. And that's not unusual because we're all being woken up every single day of our life. But the question is what do we do with what we have heard? This present age that we're living in is not an age to be endured or waited out. Jesus is doing something. He is building his kingdom, and he wants it to be manifest. He wants it to be seen. In the midst of the chaos of the world all around us, he wants it to be evident. And this is the way that we should live in this present kingdom come age. This is the way this is what happens when people are in love with him and expectant of his kingdom, expectant of his return. This is the way we live when we take what he has given to us and invest it into his purposes. And this is the way we live when we share his love with precious people, revealing to them that the kingdom of God is a kingdom of love. And as we live like this, then his kingdom has come here among us in the way that we live. It is evident in the way people around us can see in our lives. And he wants that to be seen and heard all around the world to all peoples. So he says to us today, will we wake up to his kingdom? Will we live that way? Will we live in a way out of our love for him and out of the gratitude that we had the opportunity to hear and the gospel and what a miracle that was? Are we willing to share that miracle with other people who have not yet heard? Is today a wake-up call for you? Is it a chance for you to awaken to kingdom reality? To realize that every day is significant in Jesus' plan? I know that it's a wake-up call for me. Every time I hear that call. Let's live in love with him in ways that invest in his purposes and that touch the lives of people around the world in need of his love. Let's pray. Father, I just want to thank you for this day, this opportunity to be able to share about Thailand and what you're doing there, but also to be reawakened again to what you want us to do in this present time. Father, I pray that you'll help each one of us to really consider ways that we can share our love for you even more in our own personal relationship with you, with those around us, that they may see the love that we have for you. Father, help us to also consider our investments. How can we invest better in your kingdom, in the ways that you would want us to invest, whether that be our time, whether that be the abilities that you've given us, whatever it is, Lord, help us to know how best we can invest them in you. And Lord, also help us to be able to share that your kingdom is love with people that have not yet heard. Even people in this area, they may have heard in many different ways, but they haven't heard directly because we may not have had that opportunity to share with them. Help us, Lord, to find those opportunities and use them as you bring them forth before us. We thank you for this morning together of worship and praise. May you be glorified in our lives, and may you be pleased as you hear from our hearts as we pray to you. In Jesus' name, amen.